360 billion yuan, or 51 billion US dollars. That's the amount China has pledged to invest in Africa over the next 3 years. Under the frameworks such as the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation and the Belt and Road Initiative, China has already committed hundreds of billions of dollars to the continent. While these investments have led to significant infrastructure improvements, they also faced controversies from Western media, particularly around concerns about debt dependency.
The Diplomat, China, debt trap. The Economist, the perils of China's debt trap diplomacy. The BBC, China, is it burdening poor countries with unsustainable debt?
Having lived in Zimbabwe for 5 years, my colleague Gao Junya joins this episode to share first-hand insights into how Chinese investment has impacted Africa, and more importantly, how the local people view their country's partnership with China. It's Saturday, September the 7th. Junya, you were in Zimbabwe for 5 years. And I know you consider Zimbabwe as your second home.
Of course.
Many African countries and cities are going through a very rapid process of modernization. And you were in Zimbabwe for 5 years. What do you think was the biggest change in Zimbabwe during your stay there?
I think, because as a correspondent for our company over there, one of the main responsibilities for me is actually to cover the cooperative projects between China and Africa. And of course, because I was based in Zimbabwe, so most of the assignments I got is Zimbabwe related. Actually, I think less than 1 week after I arrived in Harare, Zimbabwe back in January 2018, the first assignment I got is that there was this group of 10 medical teams from China's Hunan province. They were in Harare on a voluntary basis, actually. They were in Harare to provide medical treatment to patients in Zimbabwe's largest public hospital, Peranyatwa Hospital. They were there for 3 weeks, I think, and especially they were treating patients with cervical cancers. Besides the treatment, they were also bringing with them a batch of medical equipment, which was quite necessary for a public hospital in Harare. This is one project I'd like to mention. And the other one is that less than 2 months after my arrival, I went to Kariba, a town that is 400 kilometers away from the capital Harare. The reason I was there is because there is this commission of the Kariba South hydropower power station extension program, because there is Lake Kariba in Zimbabwe, and between Zimbabwe and Zambia, they have this dam which are providing the necessary electricity for both countries.
Right.
And Chinese companies, they've been helping to upgrade the electricity facilities on the Zimbabwean side, and I was there to cover the commission ceremony. So I think from those two projects, we can tell that, one is a huge infrastructure project, which been, providing the necessary power for the country, to run business, to run the industry. And the other one is, we can say it's a small and beautiful and smart project, right? It's been benefiting local people. So these are just two examples of my assignments over there. But, this is actually my daily work over there. I've been witnessing this kinds of cooperation between the two countries and between China and Africa. And I think these projects, be it big or small, they're definitely bringing tangible benefits to ordinary people.
Right. So you were there for 5 years, but within just weeks of arriving there.
Of course, yes.
And you already saw the changes and improvements brought by either the Chinese medical teams or the companies that's upgrading the power station that's providing electricity to the locals. So from many different aspects, that there's improvement to the lives of the local people there.
Yeah.
And how do Zimbabweans think of the influence and changes brought by this Chinese aid and investment Do they think their lives has been improved there?
Yes, of course. Take the electricity supply, for example. I was mentioning this hydropower station. Actually, Chinese company, they've been also helping to upgrade Wangay power station. It is a coal-powered station in Zimbabwe. And also now a lot of Chinese companies, they've been engaged in solar panels, and they've been engaged in those new solar energy, and to provide sufficient power supply for Zimbabwe.
Green energies.
Green energy as well, yes. Because a lot of African countries, including Zimbabwe, are facing this power deficit. While I was living there, the power cuts were actually also a headache for me. So I think these projects, are changing people's life. They're bringing enough electricity. That means they were suffering less of the so-called load shedding. So that's one. And also, besides those big projects, constructed both by big Chinese companies, let's say SOEs, and some private companies, and investments from small companies. They were there, and for example, I know some Chinese businessmen. They were opening some, let's say, brick factories and even cement factories. They are not only bringing job opportunities for local people, they are reducing the cost of, let's say, bricks. Because back in Zimbabwe, I think including, I have a lot of friends, they've been building their own houses, and they need certain building materials like bricks. And those brick companies and factories, they've been reducing the cost. That means people, they can spend less money in building their own houses. And also, let's say Huawei and ZTE, those companies, they're also providing certain, like they've been building base stations in Zimbabwe, so that rural areas, they can also have access to the internet. So I think these are all the changes that have been brought about by the Chinese investments.
Right, electricity and internet service. I learned from you that it's, even till this day, it may still be, power cut may still be part of daily life.
Yes.
In Zimbabwe. And
unfortunately,
you don't consider that as a big problem, but I think, to me, and I believe many others will also agree with me, that it will be quite a big problem if there's no access to electricity. So it's important to have these services upgraded for just to make their lives better for the local people. And outside Zimbabwe, Chinese investments in Africa are common across many countries. And I know there are many successful examples in Zimbabwe, but investments, they won't always be a smooth sailing. For example, there are questions into the profitability of the Mombasa-Nairobi standard gauge railway, SGR. And what do you think of that infrastructure project from Kenya?
I think I'm just doubting, this railway was put into operation back in 2017. It's just 7 years past. Why people are now starting to doubt about the profitability? Because
it's still quite brand new.
Yeah, because there's a long way to go, right? This is such a huge infrastructure. I think, first of all the cooperative projects between China and African countries, it's based on mutual respect, be based on mutual consultation. It's not like China is forcing a certain kind of project on a certain country. I think this is based on the need of at least the Kenyan government. Why in the first place they said yes, it's because they need this one. And evidence proves that this railway is definitely boosting the economic growth and also of Kenya, not only Kenya actually, even in the broader, let's say, East Africa region. Because by building this railway, the travel time between Nairobi and Mombasa has been significantly dropped from over 12 hours actually to now to 4 to 5 hours.
Wow.
Yes. So it made it easier and faster to transport goods between the port of Mombasa, the largest port in East Africa, and the inland area of Kenya, not only Nairobi actually. And I think now Nairobi is also building a railway exceeding it, not only linking to Nairobi and to other towns and cities as well, even to neighboring countries like Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan. So this railway is definitely improving the logistics chain. It has the potential to boost the regional trade and economic growth. And at the same time, by building this railway, and even the running of this railway is creating a lot of job opportunities, and be it in, let's say, tourism, agriculture, and manufacturing. I'll give you an example. Is taking a ride on this railway is definitely on my list if I have the chance to travel to Kenya.
So you haven't done that yet?
Not yet, sadly, but it's on my list. And, this railway is passing through certain regions that has a lot of tourism resources.
Okay.
And besides that, we know that there is this huge traffic congestion in Kenya as well. Because Kenya, compared to other African countries, it is developing quite fast. Then it comes with this certain developing problems like traffic congestion.
Right.
But like we said, the travel time between Nairobi and Mombasa has been reduced, and also it provides a certain another alternative. And besides, the Mombasa Kenya standard gauge railway is definitely a flagship project under China's Belt and Road Initiative. So I think when we invest, we need to look at long-term profits, right? It's not like we're questioning project so big, within such a short time. I think time will tell if this infrastructure is bringing tangible benefits or not.
Yeah, perhaps we don't even need to read too much deep into the details. Just the fact that this railway is getting extended to more countries, I think it's already a strong proof that this project benefits the country and its people. But China is not the only country that's providing aid, investment, and loans to Zimbabwe, Kenya, and other African countries. So there have been many Western agencies that have been providing funding resources to African countries. And now, this partnership between China and many African countries seems to be working pretty well. And what do you think that makes the Chinese approach different from the Western resources?
Yeah, we just held this forum on China-Africa cooperation, but more and more countries now, they're establishing their bilateral dialogue and certain forum or cooperation mechanism with African countries, because I think you heard that Indonesia, actually, they just held this forum on China-Indonesia cooperation. South Korea is on board, and Japan is on board as well. Yes, I think this is quite a good gestures that those countries, they are now eyeing the African market, and they're trying to provide their certain assistance and their cooperation with African countries. But I think, personally, I think China-Africa cooperation, it is actually leading the cooperation of other, international society to Africa. But China-Africa cooperation is different. It's because, first of all, China is not interfering in the internal affairs of African countries. There would be no political conditions attached to certain agreements. And also, I think we can tell from a lot of cooperative projects that those projects are actually there meeting the demand of African countries, be it infrastructure or be it what we've been talking about, the small and smart projects. And also, China's cooperation with African countries, it doesn't come with certain geopolitical competition. There is no private profits or private interest involved. It's just out of China's willingness. China is the biggest developing countries in the world. Africa is the continent with the most developing countries. And we've been enjoying solid friendship with African countries over the past 70 years, let's say. And based on my observation in Zimbabwe, I think most of the assistance from the USA to Zimbabwe is on the non-governmental organization level. For example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But I think in terms of investment, let's say certain trade, economy related, I don't think the U.S. enterprises are that willing to do that. On the one hand, the U.S. government has been imposing sanctions on the Zimbabwean government for over 20 years.
Okay.
Yes, since the beginning of this century. And I think those enterprises, they're definitely worried about those political risks. On the other hand, African countries, they're in a certain developing stage. Companies must look at the outcomes, what they can get from their investment. I think this is also one of the reasons why they are not that willing to do so. But China is different because we have enjoyed very good political relationship with Zimbabwe. And that's why we've been investing so much and we've been providing so much assistance and help.
Okay. So no strings attached and no involvement of geopolitical competition. That's probably one of the main differences between the Chinese approach to investing in Africa and the Western ones. And you know what? One of the comments that I see most often when it comes to the topic regarding China and Africa is from the African internet users that when China comes to Africa, they talk cooperation. And when certain Western country comes to Africa, they talk about China. That comment really highlights how I see that local people see the difference between Chinese and Western approach in investment there. And I think that's why many African countries have been embracing Chinese investment and establishing their mutual partnership. And at the same time, the opposition voices to this partnership mainly comes from Western countries. And one of the accusations on this partnership is that there's a debt trap, that China is trying to ensnare African countries from these investments. And what do you think of these media attacks on Chinese investment in Africa, including this so-called debt trap?
It's no surprise at all because it's such a cliche. I think I've been talking to a number of African friends and African experts who actually know the true picture of China-Africa cooperation. They know, what's been happening on the ground, so they would rebuke such a claim. Because I'd like to say it here again that based on statistics from the World Bank in 2022, actually, Africa owned $655.6 billion US to external creditors. You know what? China's public lending accounted for less than 10% of that.
Okay.
Yeah, and more than 35% of that actually is owned to Western banks, asset managers, and oil traders. And you know what? On average, they charge twice as much interest on their loans. Here I'd like to quote what a senior politician in Zimbabwe, Christopher Msvangwa, he's now the Secretary for Information and Publicity for the ruling party ZANU-PF, and he said that the Western countries, they're the ones who made Africa every debt trap. Before, for Africa, if you wanted capital, you would have to go to Paris, it's expensive. You try to go to New York, it's even more expensive. And you try to go to London, it's through the roof. I think that is the loud and clear defense against that trap thing.
Despite this smear campaign on the partnership between China and African countries, they have shown the attitude with their actions, because we just concluded the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, and also regarding Zimbabwe on September the 3rd, earlier this week, China and Zimbabwe have further signed documents on the Belt and Road Initiative and also the 2030 vision. And we can hear how much passion and attachment you have for Zimbabwe. How do you see the partnership between China and Zimbabwe going forward?
Of course, it's getting better. I actually, before our show, I just watched the interview the leaders' talk, they had with President Emerson Mnangagwa. He's been talking a lot about the achievements he made so far during his trip, and he's been talking a lot about the outcomes of the China-Zimbabwe cooperation over the past 40 years, half a century. For me personally, I'm very happy to see so many deepened cooperation between the two sides, because I know those cooperation are helping to develop local economies, are helping to improve the infrastructure. They're providing job opportunities for people. I think this is most important when it comes to China-Africa, China-Zimbabwe cooperation. I think they signed 17 agreements, a certain framework during this trip. And one that captures my eyes is that the framework agreement on economic partnership for shared development, that protocol for phytosanitary requirements for the export of Zimbabwe fresh avocados to China.
Okay.
Because, I lived there for quite a long time. I know how good.
You miss the avocados.
Yes, the Zimbabwean avocados are. They're good and they're cheap. And now we know that avocados from South Africa will also be imported to China. And now we're going to see more exchanges of those, be it agricultural products and other products. So this reflects the exchanges between China and African countries. And also it is changing our daily lives. Whether I am working in Zimbabwe or I am working in China, I've been enjoying such cooperation.
So it's becoming more interconnected, and we are also enjoying premium avocados and other crops.
Yes, and
Africa.
beef. You'll definitely need to try the Zimbabwean beef. Very good.
Thank you very much, Junya.
Thank you, Yunqi.
A Reason to Report highlights the significant achievements on the China-Africa partnership, which has supported the construction and refurbishment of 100,000 kilometers of roads, 10,000 kilometers of railways, as well as hundreds of ports and thousands of bridges. The infrastructure development has also expanded internet access to nearly 1 billion Africans, many of whom actively defend China against the negative portrayals on various social media platforms. Ultimately, only the local people can truly judge whether an investment benefits their communities. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Deep Dive. If you enjoyed what you just heard, don't forget to follow us on your podcast platforms. Just search for Deep Dive. You can also leave comments to let us know what you want to learn about China and beyond. This episode is brought to you by me, Li Yunqi, and my colleagues Zhang Zhang and Qi Zhi. Special thanks to CGTN Radio reporter Gao Junya. I'll see you in the next one.